Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're looking into someone you might think you know from the New Testament, but maybe there's more to her story. Mary Magdalene.
That's right. You shared a great Bible study transcript from Reverend Carr that really gets into it.
Yeah, and our plan is to sort of unpack that, look at the details, and see what we can learn about her significance.
Definitely. Because, when you hear Mary Magdalene, certain ideas often pop up first.
Right, Reverend Carr mentions that too, that kind of bad girl reputation she sometimes gets saddled with.
Exactly. So what we want to do is really look at what the Bible itself says. Does that reputation actually hold up?
And here's something that might surprise you right off the bat. Reverend Carr points out she's mentioned, 12 times in the New Testament?
12 times. Yeah. Which is pretty remarkable when you think about it.
I mean, more than some of the big name apostles, right?
Absolutely. That alone kind of suggests she was, well, more important than we often give her credit for.
So the big questions we're digging into are, based on the Gospels, who really was she? What do they actually emphasize?
And maybe where did that other reputation come from?
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first. Her initial connection with Jesus, Reverend Carr points us straight to Luke chapter 8.
Verse 2. It says she was delivered from 7 demons.
Which sounds pretty dramatic.
It does. But what's interesting, and Reverend Carr makes sure to note this, is that she wasn't alone in being healed.
Ah, okay.
Luke 8, right before mentioning Mary, talks about certain women who had been healed of evil spirits and sicknesses.
So she's part of a group there.
Exactly. It helps us see her experience wasn't totally unique, but part of Jesus's wider impact, especially on women.
That makes sense. And Reverend Carr really draws a line from that experience, that deliverance.
To her decision to follow Jesus.
Yeah, and to actively serve him. It feels like a natural progression, doesn't it?
Totally. You experience something that profound, that freeing.
Yeah.
Well, you'd want to stick close to the source of that freedom.
Right. You'd want to give back somehow, serve. Like Reverend Carr says, that encounter often sparks a desire to serve.
And it's important to remember, as Reverend Carr also brings up, sometimes the role of women in these stories gets a bit downplayed over time.
That's a fair point.
We tend to focus heavily on the 12 male disciples, but the texts show women were right there, actively involved.
And Luke 8.1 and 2 explicitly say these women, including Mary Magdalene, were traveling with Jesus and the 12.
Yeah, town to town, village to village. They were part of that core group, hearing the teachings, seeing the miracles.
So not just followers from afar?
No, not at all. Reverend Carr's point is, women were there, women were always engaged, involved in some aspect of the kingdom. We need to remember that when reading.
Okay, so beyond following and serving, there's another key aspect Reverend Carr highlights.
The financial support.
Yes. Luke 8, verse 3. It specifically names Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, and many others.
And what were they doing? Supporting Jesus and the disciples out of their own resources.
That's huge. This wasn't a small thing.
No. Think about the practicalities. Jesus and a group of disciples traveling constantly. They needed food, places to stay, general support.
And these women were providing it from their own means.
It really underlines their commitment, doesn't it? Reverend Carr uses this analogy. Sometimes people find it easier to spend money on, everyday stuff than supporting God's work.
It makes you think about priorities then and now.
Right. But these women, they saw the need, they believed in the mission, and they put their resources behind it. As Carr says, God has need of our resources. They really understood that.
Okay, so let's tackle the elephant in the room. That bad rep you mentioned earlier.
Right. The common link people make between Mary Magdalene and the quote-unquote sinful woman.
The one who anoints Jesus' feet in Luke chapter 7.
Exactly. And this is where Reverend Carr's analysis is really helpful. He asks a crucial question.
Does the Bible actually say they're the same person?
And the answer, based on his reading, is no. The text doesn't explicitly make that connection.
Interesting, because it feels like such a common assumption.
It really does. But then you look at the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, John. They also have stories about a woman anointing Jesus.
But the details are different.
Yeah, quite different sometimes. Where it happened, who was there, whether it was his head or his feet that got anointed. It varies.
And doesn't John's Gospel name a Mary?
It does in chapter 12. But that Mary is identified as the sister of Lazarus.
Ah, so a different Mary.
Potentially, yes. Other accounts just say a woman, no name given. And Reverend Carr makes the excellent point that Mary was an incredibly common name back then, like John.
So having the same first name doesn't automatically mean it's the same individual across different stories.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And there's another layer to this that Reverend Carr points out.
Which is,
The assumption that being delivered from demons must mean you were living some kind of terribly sinful or promiscuous life beforehand.
right, that leap people make.
He really challenges that. He reminds us, all have sinned. Experiencing demonic oppression doesn't automatically label someone's entire past or moral character.
That's such an important distinction. There could be various reasons, right? It's not always about specific willful sin causing it.
Exactly. So the main takeaway here, the point Reverend Carr really drives home, is the lack of solid scriptural proof linking this Mary Magdalene to that unnamed sinful woman in Luke 7.
Okay, so that really clears up a major source of potential confusion. Let's shift focus then to her loyalty, especially during the really tough times.
Yes, the crucifixion. Reverend Carr emphasizes her presence there.
When many others had scattered.
Right. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record her being there at the cross. While many of the male disciples had fled, she stayed.
And it mentions other women too, often other Marys as well.
True, but Mary Magdalene is consistently named, often first. It really speaks to her courage and her unwavering commitment, standing by him in that moment of ultimate suffering.
That's powerful. And her devotion didn't stop there, did it?
No. Reverend Carr points out she was also there for the burial.
Watching where they laid his body. Matthew, Mark, Luke mentioned this too.
Seeing it through right to the very end. Just steadfast.
Which leads us to arguably the most critical moment of all.
Resurrection, yes.
According to John and Mark's Gospels, Mary Magdalene is the very first person to see Jesus after he had risen.
The first witness. It's impossible to overstate the significance of that.
Describe that encounter a bit. John's Gospel has the details, right?
It does. She goes to the tomb, finds it empty, talks to angels. And then she encounters Jesus himself outside the tomb, though she doesn't recognize him at first.
And then he gives her a specific job to do.
A crucial one. He says, "Go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God."
Wow. So Reverend Carr makes this really powerful statement about that moment.
That she was the first one to preach the gospel.
Exactly. The first person commissioned to announce the resurrection, the absolute core message of Christianity.
And think about that. This woman, who's often been marginalized or mischaracterized, she gets entrusted with that news first.
It's incredible. And Mark's Gospel adds another layer, doesn't it, about how the others reacted.
Yeah, it mentions the disciples didn't believe her at first when she told them.
Which almost highlights her testimony even more, in a way. Despite their skepticism, she was the one who had seen him.
Her encounter was the first proof.
And Reverend Carr keeps circling back to just how often her name pops up, especially around these final crucial events.
Yeah, the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection morning. She's consistently there and often listed first among the women.
It really underscores her importance in that narrative arc. She wasn't just a background character.
Not at all. She was central to these defining moments.
So when we pull all these threads together, using Reverend Carr's scriptural analysis, the picture that emerges is quite different from the common perception.
Absolutely. Not a woman primarily defined by some assumed sinful past.
No, instead we see a deeply committed disciple.
Someone who financially supported the ministry.
Someone who showed incredible courage and loyalty during his suffering.
And crucially, the first person to witness and announce the resurrection, the foundation of the faith.
It really does make you question where that negative reputation came from.
It seems most likely, as Reverend Carr suggests, a mix of mistaken identity, confusing her with the unnamed sinful woman.
And maybe also those historical biases. The tendency to minimize women's roles in religious history.
That seems very plausible. It's happened in many contexts.
So this deep dive, really sparked by that Reverend Carr lesson you shared, offers a totally different lens, doesn't it?
It really does. We move from seeing maybe a figure of shame to seeing, well, an example of radical devotion.
And the first evangelist, the first bearer of the good news.
Exactly. The one entrusted with the most important message.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What does it signify that Jesus chose her to be the first witness?
It's a profound question.
And how might our whole understanding of the early church and women's roles within it shift if we really centered her actions and the significance the Gospels give her?
It definitely invites more thought, more reflection.
Yeah.
It's a much richer, more complex, and frankly, more inspiring story when you look at it this way.